The freezing water of the Chicago River stole her breath, but she couldn't stop. A child was drowning. She dragged the boy to the concrete shore, pumped his small chest until he gasped, and looked up, straight into the barrels of 6 loaded Glocks. She had just saved the heir to the city's deadliest crime syndicate. The wind coming off Lake Michigan in late November was sharp enough to slice through bone. Cressida Turner, a 26-year-old pediatric trauma nurse at Rush University Medical Center, pulled her wool scarf tighter around her neck as she walked along the quiet stretch of the Chicago Riverwalk. It was her rare day off, a desperate attempt to clear her head after a grueling 48-hour shift. She never expected the silence to shatter. It started with a sharp, panicked shout further down the concrete path near a private dock. Cressida turned just in time to see a scuffle, 3 men in heavy dark coats arguing near the edge. But it wasn't the men that caught her attention. It was the small, terrified figure of a little boy, no older than 6, clutching a toy airplane. One of the men shoved another. The larger man stumbled backward, slamming into the child. There was a sickening splash. Cressida didn't think. Her medical training and pure adrenaline overrode any instinct for self-preservation. She sprinted down the walkway, shedding her heavy trench coat and boots as she ran. The 3 men were peering over the edge, screaming in Italian, but none of them were making a move to jump. The river was notoriously treacherous, choked with debris and paralyzingly cold. Cressida vaulted over the iron railing and plunged into the murky, freezing depths. The shock of the water was instantaneous. It felt like 1,000 needles driving into her skin, forcing the air from her lungs. She forced her eyes open in the dark, brackish water, searching frantically. There. A faint gleam of a silver winter jacket, sinking fast. Cressida kicked hard against the vicious undercurrent. Her muscles screamed in protest, seizing from the cold, but she reached out, grabbing a fistful of the boy's jacket. He was completely limp. Wrapping her arm securely around his chest, she fought her way back to the surface. She broke the water, gasping for air, and locked her eyes on the concrete ledge. "Help me!" she screamed at the men above, her teeth chattering so violently she could barely form the words. 2 of the men reached down, hauling the unconscious boy up first, then grabbing Cressida by the arms and dragging her onto the frost-covered concrete. Cressida didn't waste a second shivering. She crawled over to the boy, tilting his head back to open his airway. He was blue. No pulse. No breath. "Come on, buddy, come on," she whispered frantically, beginning chest compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. She pinched his nose, delivering 2 rescue breaths. The men in suits were pacing frantically, screaming into their cell phones. 15, 16, 17. Cressida pressed down, blocking out the chaos. Breathe. On the 30th compression, the boy's chest convulsed. He violently rolled to the side, vomiting up river water and coughing uncontrollably. Cressida collapsed back onto her heels, trembling violently, a wave of profound relief washing over her as the boy began to cry. Before she could wrap her arms around him to keep him warm, the screech of heavy tires echoed off the concrete walls of Wacker Drive. 3 blacked-out Cadillac Escalades jumped the curb, swerving onto the pedestrian path and boxing them in. The doors flew open, and a dozen men in tailored suits poured out, their hands hovering over the bulges beneath their jackets. The air grew thick with immediate suffocating tension. The 3 men who had been on the dock dropped their heads, physically stepping back in submission. From the center, SUV emerged a man who seemed to swallow all the oxygen in the area. Dante Costa. Though Cressida didn't know his name yet, she recognized the terrifying authority radiating from him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp, aristocratic features and eyes the color of forged steel. He wore a dark wool overcoat, but the cold didn't seem to touch him. He didn't run, but his strides were predatory as he closed the distance. He dropped to his knees in the freezing puddle beside the boy, his ruthless expression fracturing into raw panic. "Leo," Dante breathed, pulling the shivering, soaking wet child into his chest. "Leo mio Angelo, I've got you." "Papa!" the boy sobbed into his coat. It was so cold. Dante stood, wrapping his own massive coat around his son, shielding him. Then, his steel gaze slowly turned to the three men who had been watching the boy. "Who?" Dante's voice was barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the wind like a blade. "Who let this happen?" "Boss, it was an accident." One of the men started, trembling. Dante gave a subtle nod. Two of the newly arrived men stepped forward, drawing suppressed handguns in one fluid motion, and pressed them against the ribs of the bodyguards. Cressida gasped, scrambling backward on the icy concrete. Dante's eyes snapped to her. He took in her soaking wet clothes, her blue lips, and the way she was shaking. "Who is she?" Dante demanded. "She jumped in, boss," one of his lieutenants, a scarred man named Dominic, said quietly. "She pulled him out. Saved his life." Dante stared at Cressida for a long, agonizing moment. His mind, wired for survival in a treacherous underworld, immediately calculated the angles. A random civilian? In the exact right place? At the exact right time? "Take her!" Dante ordered coldly, turning toward his SUV with his son. "Wait, what?" Cressida stammered, trying to stand, but slipping on the ice. "I need to go home. I need to get dry." Dominic stepped in front of her, his massive frame blocking the city lights. He grabbed her arm with a grip like a steel vise. "You're coming with us, miss. Don't make a scene." Before Cressida could scream for help, she was shoved into the stifling heat of the third escalade, the doors locking heavily behind her as they sped off into the Chicago night. The drive was a blur of neon city lights fading into the dark, winding roads of the northern suburbs. Cressida huddled in the leather seat, wrapped in a fleece blanket someone had tossed at her. Every time she tried to ask a question, the driver and the armed guard in the passenger seat remained completely silent. They finally passed through a set of towering wrought-iron gates in Lake Forest, pulling up to a sprawling, fortress-like stone estate. Cressida was ushered inside by Dominic, rushed through a grand foyer lined with marble, and pushed into what looked like a state-of-the-art private medical suite hidden in the east wing. A silver-haired man in a white coat, Dr. Aris Sterling, was already waiting. He immediately took charge of Leo, rushing the boy into an adjoining room with heated blankets, IV fluids, and cardiac monitors. Cressida was left sitting on an examination table, shivering, while a female staff member brought her dry scrubs to change into. Once she was dressed and sipping hot tea to bring her core temperature up, the heavy oak door clicked shut, locking from the outside. She was a prisoner. 10 minutes later, the door swung open. Dante Costa walked in. He had shed his overcoat, revealing a tailored black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, exposing dark ink crawling up his forearms. He pulled a chair to the center of the room, sitting backward on it, and stared at her. "Cressida Turner," Dante said smoothly, reading off her wet driver's license, which he had confiscated from her discarded coat. 26, lives in a walk-up in Wicker Park, works at Rush University Medical Center. "Give that back to me," Cressida demanded, her voice shaking, partly from the lingering cold, partly from anger. "I saved your son's life. Is this how you say thank you? By kidnapping me?" Dante's jaw tightened. "In my world, Ms. Turner, there are no coincidences. My son just happens to fall into the river, despite having 3 trained handlers, and a pediatric trauma nurse just happens to be walking by, fully prepared to perform textbook CPR. Cressida stared at him in disbelief. "Are you insane? I was taking a walk. I ruined my favorite coat, nearly froze to death, and swallowed half the Chicago River to save your kid. If you think I staged a drowning just to— oh, what? Get close to you. You are out of your mind. Dante leaned forward, his dark eyes searching hers for any sign of deception. My wife was killed 3 years ago by a car bomb that was meant for me. The people who did it are still looking for weaknesses. They know Leo is my only weakness. It is highly probable they paid one of my men to push him and paid you to save him, so I would bring you into my home. The sheer paranoia of the man chilled Cressida more than the river water. I don't know who you are, Mr. Costa, she said, keeping her voice incredibly steady. I don't care about your enemies. I care about the fact that a 6-year-old boy was not breathing. Call the hospital, check my schedule, ask for my supervisor, Dr. Hayes. I am exactly who I say I am. Before Dante could respond, the door opened. Dr. Sterling stepped in, looking grim. Dante, the doctor said softly. Leo is stable, his temperature is rising, and his lungs are clear. But what, Aris? Dante stood up instantly, the cold Mafia boss vanishing, replaced entirely by a terrified father. He's incredibly traumatized, Dr. Sterling explained. His heart rate spikes every time one of your men walks past the glass. He keeps crying out for someone. Me, Dante said, moving toward the door. No, Dr. Sterling corrected gently. He's asking for the angel from the water. He won't let anyone put the IV in until she holds his hand. Dante stopped dead in his tracks. He slowly turned his head to look at Cressida, who was clutching her paper cup of tea. For the first time, Cressida saw a crack in Dante's impenetrable armor. It was desperation. Ms. Turner, Dante said, his voice dropping all its aggressive edge, though it remained a command. Please. Cressida didn't hesitate. She slid off the table and followed the men into the adjoining ICU room. Leo was buried under heated blankets, his pale face illuminated by the harsh medical lights. As soon as he saw Cressida, his tear-filled eyes widened. You came back, Leo whispered, his tiny voice raspy. Cressida walked to his bedside, her professional demeanor instantly taking over. She smiled warmly, taking his small, cold hand in hers. Of course I did, brave guy. I told you I wouldn't leave until you were warm. She sat by the bed, talking to him softly about his toy airplane, distracting him perfectly as Dr. Sterling slipped the IV needle into his arm. Leo didn't even flinch. He just held on to Cressida's hand like it was his only lifeline. Dante stood in the shadows of the room, watching them. Dominic approached him quietly, handing him a tablet. Boss, Dominic whispered. We checked her out. She's clean, top of her nursing class. No debts, no shady connections. She's exactly who she says she is. Dante looked at the tablet, then back at Cressida, who was now brushing Leo's damp hair off his forehead. And the men on the dock? Dante asked quietly. One of them confessed before he expired, Dominic replied grimly. The Moretti family paid them off. It wasn't an accident. They pushed Leo. Dante's eyes turned pitch black, a silent, deadly promise of war. The Morettis had infiltrated his inner circle. His own men couldn't be trusted. Anyone in this house could be bought. Except, perhaps, the stubborn nurse who had risked her own life for a stranger's child. Dante stepped out of the shadows and approached the bed. Ms. Turner. A word outside. Cressida patted Leo's hand, promising to be right back, and followed Dante into the hallway. You're free to go, Dante said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Dominic will drive you home. I will wire $5 million into your account as a token of my gratitude. Cressida blinked. $5 million? No, I don't want your money. I just want to go home. However, Dante stepped closer, his imposing figure backing her slightly against the wall. I am currently at war. The men guarding my son betrayed him. I cannot trust the nurses from the agencies, and I cannot trust my own guards. Cressida swallowed hard. What are you saying? I am saying I need someone uncorrupted to watch over my son while I tear this city apart to find the people who tried to kill him, Dante stated, his eyes locking onto hers. I am offering you a job, Cressida. Move in here. Be Leo's private caregiver until the threat is eliminated. Name your price. I have a life, Cressida protested, her heart hammering. I have a job at the hospital. I'll buy the hospital and grant you an indefinite leave of absence, Dante replied without missing a beat. He leaned in, his voice a low, dangerous velvet. He trusts you, and right now, you are the only person in this world I know I can trust. Stay. Cressida looked through the glass window at the little boy who had almost died in her arms just hours ago. Then she looked at the notorious, terrifying man standing before her. She was plunging into deep water all over again, and this time she didn't know if she would be able to swim back up. Over the next 3 weeks, the sprawling Lake Forest estate became Cressida's gilded cage. True to his word, Dante had arranged an indefinite, highly paid leave of absence with Rush University Medical Center. Cressida's life now revolved around the east wing of the mansion, watching over 6-year-old Leo. The boy was recovering from the physical shock of the icy river, but the psychological scars were deeper. He refused to sleep unless Cressida was sitting in the velvet armchair by his bed. He clung to her during the day, trailing behind her as she paced the massive library or the indoor botanical garden. For Cressida, the maternal instinct she usually reserved for the pediatric ICU had fully locked onto the grieving, terrified child. Dante, however, was a phantom. A brutal, silent war was tearing through Chicago's underworld. Cressida only saw the Mafia boss in the dead of night. He would return at 3 a.m., smelling of gunpowder, expensive scotch, and cold rain. He would stand in the doorway of Leo's room, watching his son sleep, the lethal tension rolling off his broad shoulders. Whenever he looked at Cressida, the hardened, merciless don of the Costa Syndicate seemed to soften, his dark eyes lingering on her with a heavy, unspoken gratitude, and something far more dangerous. A quiet, burning possession. But Cressida's clinical instincts were warning her that the danger wasn't just on the streets of Chicago, it was inside the house. It started with Leo's lethargy. By the 3rd week, the boy should have been bouncing off the walls of the mansion. Instead, he was constantly drowsy, his speech occasionally slurring, his appetite non-existent. Dr. Aris Sterling, the family's private physician, assured Dante it was a trauma response. He prescribed daily IV vitamin drips and mild sedatives to keep the boy calm. Cressida wasn't buying it. On a Tuesday afternoon, while Dr. Sterling was taking a call in the West Wing, Cressida slipped into the private medical suite. She bypassed the encrypted digital files, opting instead for the physical waste bins. She pulled on a pair of latex gloves and dug through the discarded medical vials from Leo's morning IV push. Her heart stopped. Mixed in with the saline and vitamin B complex vials was an empty, unlabeled ampule. Cressida held it to the light, recognizing the distinct, crystalline residue of lorazepam, a heavy tranquilizer. And based on the size of the vial, the dosage was massive for a child. Sterling wasn't just keeping Leo calm, he was chemically subduing him, weakening his respiratory system. Looking for something, Nurse Turner? Cressida spun around. Dr. Sterling stood in the doorway, pocketing his cell phone. His warm, grandfatherly smile was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating sneer. You're overdosing him, Cressida said, her voice remarkably steady as she backed toward the surgical tray. "You're keeping his heart rate artificially low. If he catches even a minor respiratory infection, his lungs won't be able to handle it. He'll stop breathing in his sleep." "An unfortunate complication of his near drowning," Sterling replied smoothly, stepping into the room and locking the heavy oak door behind him. A tragic loss for Dante Costa. A grieving boss makes mistakes, and the Moretti family is waiting for him to make just one. "You're the mole," Cressida breathed, her hand blindly searching the metal tray behind her. "It wasn't just the bodyguards on the dock, it was you. The Morettis offered me $10 million to ensure the boy doesn't recover," Sterling said, drawing a suppressed 9mm pistol from his white coat. "You've been a persistent thorn in my side, Cressida. But an accidental overdose is so common with inexperienced nurses." Sterling raised the gun. Cressida didn't scream. Her hand closed around the heavy, steel oxygen cylinder wrench on the tray. As Sterling took a step forward, Cressida hurled the heavy wrench with all her might. It caught Sterling squarely in the wrist. The gun went off with a quiet thwip, the bullet shattering the glass medicine cabinet next to Cressida's head. Before Sterling could recover his aim, Cressida launched herself at him. She drove her shoulder into his chest, sending them both crashing into the medical carts. The door to the suite suddenly shattered inward, splintering off its reinforced hinges. Dante stood in the wreckage, his eyes black with murderous rage, his own weapon drawn. Dominic was right behind him. They had returned early. Dante took in the scene in a fraction of a second. The shattered glass, the gun on the floor, and Cressida pinning Sterling's arm down with her knee. "Take him," Dante snarled. Dominic dragged the screaming doctor off the floor, slamming him into the wall and disarming him completely. Dante ignored the traitor. He dropped his gun on the table and rushed to Cressida, his massive hands gripping her shoulders, pulling her up and scanning her for blood. "Did he hurt you?" Dante demanded, his voice trembling with a raw, terrifying intensity. "Cressida, look at me. Are you hit?" "No," Cressida gasped, her hands shaking as she gripped Dante's forearms to steady herself. "Dante, it's Leo. Sterling has been drugging him. We need to flush his system. Now." Dante's jaw locked. He pulled Cressida flush against his chest, wrapping his arms around her in a crushing embrace. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling deeply. For the first time, Cressida realized the Mafia boss was shaking. "You saved him," Dante whispered fiercely against her ear. "Again. You saved my world, Cressida." He pulled back, his steel eyes locking onto hers, the walls between them completely collapsing. "And you saved mine." The discovery of Dr. Sterling's betrayal triggered the final, bloody climax of the Mafia war. Knowing their mole was compromised, the Moretti family grew desperate. They couldn't wait for Dante to make a mistake. They had to force one. 3 nights later, the storm broke. Cressida was in the kitchen brewing chamomile tea for Leo when the first explosion rocked the estate. The heavy blast shattered the reinforced windows in the grand foyer, sending alarms shrieking through the mansion. The backup generators immediately kicked in, bathing the hallways in flashing red emergency lights. "Cressida!" Dante materialized from the darkness of the hallway, a tactical vest strapped over his dress shirt, an assault rifle in his hands. He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the east wing. They breached the main gate. Dominic is holding the perimeter, but there are too many. We need to get to the bunker. Gunfire erupted from the front lawn, the heavy, rhythmic thud of automatic weapons. Cressida didn't panic. She moved with the clinical precision of a trauma nurse in a mass casualty event. They sprinted into Leo's room. The boy was sitting up, terrified. "Papa!" Leo cried. "I've got you, Piccolo," Dante said, scooping the boy into his left arm while holding his rifle in his right. "Stay close to Cressida." They moved down the service stairs toward the sub-basement. Just as they reached the heavy steel door of the safe room, a shadow stepped out from the adjacent wine cellar. It was one of the Moretti hitmen who had slipped past the perimeter. The man raised his weapon. Dante spun, shoving Cressida and Leo behind his massive frame. 2 shots rang out in the confined concrete stairwell. The hitman dropped dead, a bullet from Dante's rifle between his eyes. But Dante staggered violently, slamming into the steel doorframe. He cursed in Italian, his hand flying to his right side, just below the tactical vest. Blood was already seeping through his fingers. "Dante!" Cressida screamed. "Get inside!" Dante gritted out, punching the keypad. The heavy hydraulic door hissed open. He shoved them into the brightly lit, state-of-the-art bunker and collapsed onto the concrete floor as the door sealed shut behind them. Leo started to sob. Cressida fell to her knees next to Dante. Her medical training instantly overrode her fear. "Leo, go to the corner. Cover your ears and close your eyes. Now," she commanded. The boy obeyed, curling into a ball. Cressida ripped Dante's shirt open. The bullet had entered his right flank, missing the Kevlar plate. It was a through and through, but it had nicked an artery. Bright red arterial blood was pulsing out with every heartbeat. "You're losing too much blood," Cressida said, her hands already flying to the first aid trauma kit mounted on the bunker wall. She ripped open a pack of quick-clot combat gauze. "Cressida!" Dante gasped, his skin turning a sickly, pale grey. He reached up, his bloody hand gripping her wrist. "If Dominic doesn't clear the house, there is a secondary escape tunnel behind the armory rack. Take Leo. Run!" "Shut up, Dante!" Cressida snapped, her eyes fierce as she packed the gauze directly into the gunshot wound. Dante let out a guttural roar of pain, his head falling back against the concrete. "I'm not letting you die," Cressida said, her voice breaking slightly as she applied brutal pressure to the wound. "You dragged me into this world, Dante Costa. You don't get to check out and leave me here." Dante looked up at her, a weak, blood-stained smile touching his lips. "Fierce," he whispered. "I knew it the moment you jumped into the river. You have the heart of a lioness." He reached up, his hand gently cupping her cheek, smearing a bit of his blood on her skin. "I love you, Cressida. I think I have since the moment you defied me in that medical room." Tears blurred Cressida's vision as she held the pressure, her hands trembling. "Stay with me, Dante. Please." For 45 agonizing minutes, Cressida knelt on the cold concrete floor, keeping Dante conscious, keeping him breathing, refusing to let the light fade from his eyes. Above them, the muffled sounds of explosives and gunfire echoed through the foundation. Finally, the radio on Dante's belt crackled to life. "Boss, it's Dominic. The house is secure. The Moretti assault team is wiped out. The Don of the Moretti family is dead. It's over." Cressida let out a ragged sob, slumping forward against Dante's chest. Dante wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her neck, holding her as tightly as his injuries allowed. 3 months later, the Chicago River flowed quietly under the winter sun. Cressida stood on the private dock of the Lake Forest estate, watching Leo run across the manicured lawn with his toy airplane. The shadows of the Mafia war had finally lifted. Strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind, pulling her back against a solid, warm chest. Dante rested his chin on the top of her head. He had fully recovered, though the scar on his side would forever remain, a matching set to the invisible scars they had both healed in each other. "He looks happy," Dante murmured, kissing her temple. "He's resilient," Cressida smiled, leaning into his embrace. She was wearing a heavy, expensive wool coat, a replacement for the one she had ruined months ago. She turned in his arms, looking up into the eyes of the man who ruled the city, but who belonged entirely to her. "And you?" Dante asked softly, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "Are you happy, my lioness? Do you miss the hospital?" Cressida looked at the massive stone estate, the loyal men guarding the perimeter, and the little boy laughing in the grass. She had plunged into freezing, dangerous waters to save a life, and in doing so, she had found her own. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," Cressida whispered, pulling him down for a deep, lingering kiss. She was no longer a captive, no longer an employee. She was Cressida Costa, the queen of the Chicago Syndicate, and the mother Leo had so desperately needed. Did Cressida's incredible bravery and her intense romance with the ruthless Dante Costa keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved this thrilling Mafia romance and want more heart-pounding stories, hit that like button, share this video with your fellow drama lovers, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a twist. What should our next story be? Comment below.